It's a quiet Tuesday morning in May 2016. San Francisco was waking up. In Unit 42F of a glass tower at 301 Mission Street, a man named Jerry Dodson picks up a golf ball. He doesn't say anything at first. He just sets it down on his kitchen floor, a floor he paid over $1 million to own, and lets go. He watches. The ball rolls northwest. Not fast, not dramatically, just steadily, quietly, the way all catastrophic things tend to move before anyone is willing to name them. This is the 58th floor of what was, just 7 years ago, marketed as one of the finest addresses in the Western Hemisphere, an amenity-loaded glass tower with a private wine cellar, a personal concierge, a fitness center overlooking the bay, and views that made you feel like you owned the city itself. Units sold between $1 and $10 million. The developer, Millennium Partners, had generated a total of $750 million in sales by 2013, a 25% return on a $600 million construction investment. The building was a monument to confidence, to wealth, to engineering, to the idea that humans can impose their will on any landscape, including one made of ancient mud. But that morning, in Unit 42F, a golf ball rolls northwest, and Jerry Dodson picks up his phone. Confirmed.
The Millennium Tower at 301 Mission Street in San Francisco has sunk more than 18 inches into the ground since its completion in 2009. As of this writing, it leans approximately 28 to 29 inches to the northwest, well beyond the 6-inch maximum tilt permitted by the San Francisco Building Code. The building opened to residents, made hundreds of millions of dollars, and was already moving in ways its engineers had never fully modeled. The primary source backbone for this story comes from a landmark peer-reviewed paper published in the Journal of Geotechnical and Geoenvironmental Engineering in 2023. Authored by Jonathan P. Stewart, Nathaniel Wagner, Deborah Murphy, and 6 other researchers, entitled Foundation Settlement and Tilt of Millennium Tower in San Francisco, California. The work is exhaustive, technically precise, and brutally honest about what went wrong beneath this building. It is the closest thing the engineering world has produced to a verdict. This is the story they tell. To understand how a 58-story skyscraper can quietly disappear into the earth, you first have to understand the ground San Francisco is built on. Pull back. God view now. Look at a geological cross-section of the Soma district, the south of Market neighborhood, where the Millennium Tower stands. From the surface down, the earth reads like a layer cake of catastrophe. First, artificial fill, rubble, and debris, some of it dating to the 1906 earthquake. Below that, soft, compressible bay mud, the kind of material that behaves more like wet clay than solid ground. Below that, a geological layer called the Colma Formation, a dense, silty sand laid down during the last ice age, roughly 12,000 to 100,000 years ago. And then, roughly 200 feet beneath the surface, bedrock. Solid. Immovable. The thing you want your skyscraper to stand on.
When Millennium Partners commissions geotechnical engineers Treadwell and Rollo to design the Millennium Tower's foundation, the decision was made to drive the piles not to bedrock, but to the Colma sand layer, 60 to 90 feet down. These are called friction piles. They work differently from end-bearing piles. An end-bearing pile is exactly what it sounds like. It reaches all the way down and rests on a hard surface, like a nail driven into a wall stud. A friction pile doesn't reach bedrock. Instead, it relies on the surrounding soil gripping the pile along its length. Friction, distributed across the shaft, holding the weight of whatever sits above. For lighter structures, friction piles are perfectly adequate. Engineers use them all over the world. But the Millennium Tower is not a light structure. Over 3 years, 2005 to 2008, workers pour what will become one of the largest and heaviest reinforced concrete buildings ever erected in San Francisco. The finished tower will weigh in total an estimated 711 million pounds. Every square foot of its foundation transfers a vertical load into the earth below. Engineers designed the foundation system, a 3-meter thick concrete mat, essentially a massive reinforced concrete raft, supported by 942 pre-stressed concrete piles, each one approximately 12 to 18 inches in diameter, driven into the Colma sand layer between 60 and 90 feet below grade. No independent geotechnical peer review was ever performed on this design. According to court testimony later, Jack Mohi, a professor of structural engineering at UC Berkeley, whom Millennium Partners had hired for peer review, stated under oath that his review covered only the structural design, not the foundation. And critically, as the geotechnical engineers who reported to geotechnical.org later confirmed, no separate independent geotechnical engineer was ever retained by the developer to conduct a standalone assessment of the soil behavior beneath this specific site. The city's permitting process did not require one.
Here is the mechanism, and it matters that you understand it precisely. Beneath the Colma sand layer that the friction piles were embedded in lies a geological formation known locally as the Old Bay Clay, a layer of over-consolidated marine clay, dense and ancient, that stretches under much of downtown San Francisco's waterfront district. Old Bay Clay has a peculiar property: it consolidates. When the stress on it increases, when a 711 million pound building begins pressing down on the layers above it, water is slowly squeezed out of the clay pores, and the clay compresses. This process is called primary consolidation, and it is slow. It takes years, decades. The geotechnical engineers who designed the Millennium Tower's foundation modeled this process. Their prediction: the building would settle no more than 4 to 6 inches over its entire design life. By 2014, just 5 years after opening, the tower had already sunk 18 inches, triple that predicted maximum. Here is where the story fractures into something far more complex than a simple design miscalculation. Because beginning in 2011, something else was happening underground. 1 block away, the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority, a public agency responsible for constructing what would become the Salesforce Transit Center, began excavating the site of the old Trans-Bay Terminal. That excavation required dewatering, pumping groundwater out of the subsurface to keep the work site dry. This is standard construction practice, but dewatering changes things. When water is pumped out of saturated soils, the effective stress on the clay layers below increases, which accelerates consolidation. The Old Bay Clay begins to compress faster than it otherwise would. The peer-reviewed paper in the Geotechnical and Geo-Environmental Engineering Journal documented that the Millennium Tower experienced multiple episodes of accelerated settlement that correlated directly with nearby dewatering operations, some of which lasted for 6 continuous years.
The developer blamed the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority. The TJPA pointed out that the building had already sunk 10 inches before their excavation even began. Both things, engineers said later, were partially true. What nobody told the buyers, and this is the point that haunts the entire story, is that the tower was already sinking before the first resident unpacked a single box. Settlement monitoring data collected by the building's own engineers, beginning in 2006, during construction, showed the tower moving into the earth. By 2015, that data had been shared with city authorities. But the public, the buyers, the residents, the people who had wired millions of dollars to own a home in this tower, would not be told until May 2016. That gap, from 2015 to 2016, 1 year of silence. That year will later form the core of the fraud allegations.